There is a version of you that moves through life untouched by noise. Criticism doesn't shake it. Praise doesn't inflate it. Trends don't pull it off course. It sees clearly, chooses deliberately, and acts without needing permission. Most people never meet that version of themselves, not because it doesn't exist, but because it demands something rare, the courage to stop seeking comfort and start building strength. The philosophy of becoming untouchable is not about isolation or indifference for its own sake. It is about sovereignty. The ability to stand in a world full of pressure, expectation, and constant opinion, and remain internally free. That kind of freedom is not given. It is forged through a shift in how you relate to happiness, to other people, and to your own desires. Nietzsche challenges a deeply ingrained assumption that life should be comfortable, pleasant, and safe. He turns that idea on its head. Growth does not come from ease, it comes from resistance. Greatness requires tension, conflict, and the willingness to carry weight without collapsing under it. Becoming untouchable begins when you stop organizing your life around avoiding discomfort and start organizing it around becoming stronger. But strength alone is not enough. Without detachment, strength becomes fragile. If your sense of self depends on how others see you, then every opinion becomes a threat. This is where a different kind of discipline enters, one that is less about controlling the world and more about controlling your response to it. The Stoics understood this with brutal clarity. There are things you can control and things you cannot. Confusing the two is the source of unnecessary suffering. Letting go is not passive, it is precise. It is choosing not to give your energy to what does not belong to you. Schopenhauer takes this even further by exposing the endless cycle of desire that drives human dissatisfaction. Wanting more, chasing more, expecting more, this is what keeps the mind restless. To become untouchable, you must learn to step outside that cycle. Not by eliminating desire completely, but by seeing it clearly enough that it no longer controls you. When you are no longer enslaved by wanting, you become difficult to disturb. Put these ideas together and a different kind of person begins to emerge. Someone who is not constantly reacting, not constantly seeking validation, not constantly chasing a moving target of happiness. Instead, there is a steadiness, a quiet confidence that comes from knowing where your control begins and ends, from accepting the nature of struggle, and from no longer needing the world to approve of your existence. Becoming untouchable is not about escaping life. It is about engaging with it on your own terms. It is about building a mind that remains clear when things fall apart, a character that does not bend under pressure, and a perspective that cannot be easily manipulated. The world will continue to be loud, unpredictable, and demanding. That will not change. The question is whether you will continue to be shaped by it, or whether you will finally learn how to stand within it, untouched. From the time you're young, you're told to find what makes you happy, to follow what feels good, to build a life that is comfortable, stable, and enjoyable. You see it in advertisements, in movies, in social media, even in most self-improvement advice. The message is always the same, repeated in different ways until it becomes unquestioned truth. Happiness is the goal. If you're not happy, something is wrong. If you suffer, you must fix it. If something is difficult, you should find a way around it. But what if that idea is the very thing keeping you weak? That's where Nietzsche enters like a disruption. Not gentle, not comforting, not trying to reassure you, but confronting you with something uncomfortable. He looks at this obsession with happiness and doesn't see progress. He sees decline. He sees something being lost. Modern culture worships comfort in ways that would have been unimaginable before. We have built systems that remove effort from almost every part of life. You don't need to struggle for food, for shelter, for survival in the same way people once did. Even discomfort is now optional. You can avoid it with a few taps on a screen. Entertainment is endless, distraction is instant. If something feels hard, there is always an easier alternative waiting. And slowly, without realizing it, this shapes you. You begin to organize your life around avoiding anything that feels uncomfortable. You start choosing the easy path without even thinking about it. You hesitate before doing anything that might expose you to failure, rejection, or struggle. You become careful, you become safe, and over time, that safety starts to look like a cage. Nietzsche saw this kind of future before it fully arrived. He described the type of person that would emerge from a world obsessed with comfort and happiness. He called this person the last man. From Thus Spoke Zarathustra, "We have invented happiness," say the last men, and they blink. That line is simple, but it carries something heavy inside it. The last man believes he has solved life. He believes he has figured out the formula. Remove risk, remove pain, remove uncertainty, and what you're left with is a stable, pleasant existence. No chaos, no danger, no deep suffering. Everything is manageable, everything is controlled. And yet, Nietzsche describes him with a kind of quiet contempt. They blink. It's such a small detail, but it says everything. There is no intensity in him, no fire, no hunger, just a kind of dull satisfaction, a life that is technically comfortable, but stripped of anything that demands strength. The last man chooses comfort over challenge. He avoids anything that might disrupt his sense of ease. He values safety above all else. He does not want to fall, so he never climbs. He does not want to suffer, so he never pushes himself far enough to grow. And because of that, he remains exactly where he is. Nietzsche isn't attacking happiness itself. He's exposing what happens when happiness becomes the highest value. When everything is measured by how good it feels, you start removing the very things that make you stronger. You start removing resistance. And without resistance, nothing develops. That's why he continues in the same passage, still describing this type of person, still showing what this world looks like when comfort becomes the priority. They have left the regions where it was hard to live, for one needs warmth. One still loves one's neighbor and rubs against him, for one needs warmth. There is something almost fragile in that image. They move away from difficulty. They move toward warmth, toward safety, toward what feels easy. Even their relationships are shaped by this need. They stay close to others not out of strength, but out of dependence. They need comfort, so they stay where it is available. And again, there is nothing extreme here, no obvious failure, no dramatic collapse, just a gradual shrinking of what a human being is capable of. This is where the problem becomes harder to see, because from the outside, this kind of life looks successful. It looks stable. It looks like something people should want. You have comfort, you have security, you have enough pleasure to keep you satisfied. There is no obvious crisis, but something feels off. You can see it in people who have everything they were told to chase. They have the job, the money, the lifestyle, the freedom. And still, there is a quiet sense of emptiness that doesn't go away. Not because something is missing on the outside, but because something inside was never developed. Comfort removes friction, and friction is what forces you to grow. When you struggle, you are forced to adapt. When things are difficult, you have to become stronger to handle them. When you face resistance, you either break or you build something new inside yourself. That process is uncomfortable, sometimes painful, but it is also what gives life weight and direction. When that friction disappears, so does the need to change. You stay the same. And at first that feels good. There is relief in not being challenged. There is comfort in staying where things are familiar. But over time that comfort starts to feel empty. Not immediately, not in a dramatic way, but slowly, like something fading in the background. That's why people start asking questions they don't know how to answer. Why does easy living feel empty? Why does comfort stop feeling satisfying after a while? Why do people who have everything still feel lost? These are not questions about happiness. They are questions about meaning. And meaning does not come from ease. It comes from effort, from struggle, from pushing yourself into places where you are forced to grow. A life built only around feeling good has no reason to demand anything from you. And if nothing is demanded from you, nothing is developed within you. That is the danger Nietzsche is pointing to. Not that happiness is bad, but that when it becomes the goal, it slowly replaces everything else. It replaces challenge with comfort. It replaces growth with stability. It replaces becoming with staying the same. And eventually you end up with a life that feels smooth, predictable, and strangely empty at the same time. Because deep down, whether you realize it or not, there is a part of you that wants more than comfort. There is a part of you that wants to be tested, to struggle, to overcome something, not for the sake of suffering, but for the sake of becoming stronger. And when that part is ignored for too long, something starts to feel wrong. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to make you question things. Maybe the problem isn't that your life is hard, maybe it's that it's too easy. Once you accept happiness as the highest goal, something subtle begins to change in the way you move through life. You don't notice it at first. It doesn't feel like a mistake. It feels like you are doing the right thing. You start choosing what feels good over what is necessary. You start avoiding anything that creates tension, resistance, or discomfort. You begin shaping your decisions around a simple question: will this make me feel better or worse? And slowly, without realizing it, that question starts controlling everything. At first it looks harmless. You skip something difficult because you're tired. You delay something important because you're not in the mood. You avoid situations that make you nervous, conversations that feel uncomfortable, challenges that might expose your weaknesses. You tell yourself you'll come back to them later, when you feel more ready, more motivated, more confident. But later rarely comes. Because the more you avoid discomfort, the less capable you become of facing it. This is where the cost begins to show. Chasing happiness as the highest goal does not make you stronger. It makes you careful. It makes you hesitant. It trains you to move away from anything that might disturb your sense of comfort. And over time, that creates a kind of quiet weakness. Not the obvious kind, not something you can easily point to, but a deeper form of fragility. The kind that shows up when things stop going your way. Because life does not stay comfortable. There will be moments where things break, where plans fail, where people leave, where effort does not lead to the outcome you expected. And when those moments come, the person who has trained himself to avoid discomfort will not be prepared. He will not have the internal strength to handle it, because he has spent his time running from the very thing that could have built that strength. Nietzsche understood this connection between struggle and strength very clearly. He didn't see hardship as something to eliminate. He saw it as something that shapes you. From Twilight of the Idols, Maxims and Arrows, Section 8. What does not kill me makes me stronger. That line has been repeated so many times that it almost loses its meaning. But if you sit with it for a moment, you realize how direct it is. Strength is not something you are born with. It is something that is built through confrontation with difficulty, through resistance, through situations that push you beyond what feels comfortable. Without that pressure, nothing develops. Think about anything that grows stronger over time. Muscles grow when they are stressed. The mind becomes sharper when it is challenged. Character is formed when you are forced to face situations that test your limits. Remove that pressure, and the growth stops. Everything stays at the same level. And this is exactly what happens when happiness becomes the main goal. You begin to remove the very conditions that create strength. You avoid the situations that would have forced you to adapt. You stay in environments where you feel safe, predictable, in control. And because of that, you never build the capacity to handle anything outside of that comfort zone. Nietzsche pushes this idea even further in another place, making it even more direct. From the Gay Science, Book 4, Section 338. One must need to be strong, otherwise one will never become strong. There is something important hidden in that line. The need comes first. The demand comes first. Strength is not something you develop casually, on the side, while everything in your life remains easy. It emerges when there is pressure, when there is necessity, when you are placed in situations where you have no choice but to rise to the level required. If you never need to be strong, you never become strong. And this is the quiet danger of a life built around comfort. It removes the need. It removes the urgency. It removes the situations that would force you to grow. Everything becomes optional. Everything can be delayed. Everything can be avoided. But avoidance always has a cost. If you avoid pain, you avoid growth. Not in an abstract way, but in a very direct, practical sense. Every time you turn away from something difficult, you are also turning away from the opportunity to expand your limits. You stay where you are, you remain the same. If you seek comfort, you weaken your tolerance. You become less capable of handling stress, less capable of dealing with uncertainty, less capable of staying composed when things don't go as planned. Your threshold lowers. Things that once would have been manageable start to feel overwhelming, not because they are objectively harder, but because you have trained yourself to operate within a narrow range of ease. And if you chase happiness, you become dependent on circumstances. Your state of mind becomes tied to how things are going around you. If everything is smooth, you feel good. If something disrupts that, your stability disappears. You are no longer in control of yourself. You are reacting to the environment, adjusting your emotions based on what is happening outside of you. That is a fragile way to live, because it means your well-being is always at risk. It depends on things you cannot fully control, and when those things shift, you are left without a foundation. This is where happiness turns into a trap. Not because happiness itself is bad, but because when it becomes the central goal, it changes your behavior. You start organizing your life around avoiding discomfort. You start filtering your decisions through the lens of immediate feeling. You choose what feels right in the moment, even if it weakens you in the long run. And over time, that pattern becomes automatic. You don't even think about it anymore. You just move away from difficulty. You hesitate when things get hard. You look for the easiest path, the least resistance, the quickest relief. And because of that, you slowly lose something important. You lose your ability to endure. Endurance is not something you notice when everything is going well. It only becomes visible when things start to fall apart. When you are tired, when you are under pressure, when things are uncertain, when you are forced to keep going without immediate reward. That is when endurance matters. And if you haven't developed it, you feel it immediately. You feel the urge to stop, to quit, to escape, to go back to something easier. And most people do exactly that, not because they lack potential, but because they have trained themselves to avoid discomfort for too long. They never built the capacity to stay in it. That is why chasing happiness as the highest goal leads to weakness, not in an obvious, visible way, but in a deeper structural way. It removes the conditions that build resilience. It lowers your tolerance for difficulty. It ties your well-being to external factors, and when those factors shift, you have nothing solid to rely on. You can see this pattern everywhere once you start looking for it. People who avoid hard conversations and then wonder why their relationships feel unstable. People who avoid effort and then feel stuck in their careers. people who avoid risk and then feel like their lives are not moving forward, it always comes back to the same thing. Avoidance feels good in the moment, but it costs you in the long run. And the longer you stay in that pattern, the harder it becomes to break out of it. Because your comfort zone becomes smaller, your tolerance becomes lower, and even small challenges start to feel like something you are not equipped to handle. At that point, it's not just about growth anymore. It's about survival, about whether you can handle what life eventually throws at you, because it will. And when it does, the question is simple. Have you trained yourself to endure, or have you trained yourself to escape? And a man who cannot endure discomfort cannot become anything. At this point, a question naturally begins to form. If chasing happiness leads to weakness, if comfort slowly drains you of strength, then what are you supposed to aim for instead? Nietzsche does not give you something soft to hold on to. He does not replace happiness with another pleasant idea. He gives you something much heavier, something that demands more from you. He gives you the idea of becoming. Not becoming successful in the way the world defines it, not becoming comfortable or liked or secure, but becoming who you are capable of being in the deepest sense, a version of yourself that is not given to you, not handed to you, not discovered by accident, but built deliberately over time. From Thus Spoke Zarathustra Part 1, On the Way of the Creator. What does your conscience say? You shall become the person you are. That line carries a kind of pressure that is easy to overlook. It doesn't say you already are who you're meant to be. It doesn't say you will naturally grow into it. It says you shall become. There is a process involved, there is effort, there is responsibility. You are not finished, you are not something fixed. You are something unfinished, something in motion, something that has to be shaped. And that changes the way you look at yourself completely. Instead of asking, who am I? You begin asking, what am I building? Instead of trying to protect your current identity, you begin to see it as something temporary, something that can be broken down and rebuilt if necessary. You stop clinging to the version of yourself that feels comfortable, and you start thinking about the version of yourself that could exist if you pushed further. This is where Nietzsche introduces one of his central ideas, self-overcoming. Growth in this sense is not about adding things on top of who you are. It is about confronting what you are right now and pushing beyond it. It is about recognizing your limitations, your habits, your fears, and then refusing to remain confined by them. That process is not smooth. It is not comfortable. Because in order to become something greater, parts of you have to be left behind. Old habits have to be broken. Old ways of thinking have to be challenged. Old versions of yourself have to be abandoned. And that doesn't feel good. There is resistance in that process. There is tension. There are moments where it feels easier to stay the same, to go back to what is familiar, to stop pushing. But self-overcoming requires that you move forward anyway, that you keep stepping into discomfort, even when everything in you wants to avoid it. Nietzsche makes this idea even more direct in another passage. From Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Prologue, Section 3. Man is something that shall be overcome. What have you done to overcome him? That question is not meant to be answered casually. It forces you to look at yourself in a different way. You are not just a person living your life. You are also something that can be surpassed, something that can be improved, refined, strengthened. And at the same time, you are also the one standing in your own way. You are both the creator and the obstacle. You are the one who sets the standard and the one who falls short of it. You are the one who wants to grow and the one who hesitates when growth requires discomfort. That internal tension is always there. It doesn't go away. But instead of avoiding it, Nietzsche is asking you to engage with it, to use it, to see it as part of the process. Because every time you push past your current limits, every time you do something that your previous self would have avoided, you are participating in that process of overcoming. You are becoming something more. This is where the idea of the Übermensch comes in. It's often misunderstood, sometimes turned into something extreme or unrealistic, but at its core, it is a simple idea. The Übermensch is someone who creates his own values. Someone who does not simply follow what everyone else is doing. Someone who does not base his life on comfort, approval, or safety. Someone who is willing to face difficulty, not because he enjoys suffering, but because he understands what it builds. This kind of person does not look at life and ask, "What is the easiest path?" He asks, "What is the path that will demand the most from me?" Because he knows that what is demanded from him is what shapes him, and that path is not easy. It requires risk, real risk. The kind where you don't know how things will turn out. The kind where you might fail, where you might struggle, where you might have to start again. It requires isolation. Not necessarily being alone all the time, but being willing to stand apart from the crowd, to make decisions that others don't understand, to move in a direction that is not validated by everyone around you. It requires sacrifice, giving up comfort, giving up immediate pleasure, giving up the version of life that feels easy in exchange for something that is harder but more meaningful. Nietzsche speaks directly to this kind of person. From Thus Spoke Zarathustra, Prologue, Section 4, "I love those who do not know how to live, except as those who go under, for they are those who cross over." There is something powerful in that image. Those who go under. It sounds like failure. It sounds like destruction. But Nietzsche sees it differently. He sees it as a necessary part of transformation. To go under is to let the current version of yourself break, to allow what you are right now to be insufficient, to accept that in order to move forward, something has to be left behind. And those who are willing to go through that process, who are willing to risk falling, to risk failing, to risk losing what they have built so far, are the ones who cross over. They are the ones who move beyond where they started. This is the path to greatness. Not a straight path, not a comfortable one, not something that feels good every day. It is a path filled with moments where you question yourself, where you struggle, where you are forced to confront your limits again and again. But each of those moments carries something important. They force you to adapt. They force you to grow. They force you to become someone who can handle more than you could before. You stop relying on how you feel in the moment. You stop making decisions based on comfort. You stop asking whether something is easy or enjoyable or convenient. A different question starts to take its place. You begin asking, will this build me? Will this push me forward? Will this make me stronger, more capable, more disciplined? That shift changes everything, because once you start living that way, your entire approach to life becomes different. Challenges are no longer something you avoid. They become something you step into. Discomfort is no longer a signal to stop. It becomes a signal that you are moving in the right direction. And slowly, without even noticing it at first, you begin to transform. Not into someone perfect, not into someone who never struggles, but into someone who is no longer controlled by the need for comfort. Someone who can endure, someone who can push forward even when it's difficult, someone who is actively shaping who they are becoming. You stop asking what feels good and start asking what builds you. Understanding all of this is one thing. Living it is something completely different. It is easy to agree with these ideas when you hear them. It is easy to feel motivated for a moment, to feel like something has clicked. But if nothing changes in the way you act, then nothing actually changes. The same habits remain, the same patterns repeat, and eventually, everything fades back into the same routine. So this is where it becomes real, not in theory, not in philosophy alone, but in the way you move through your day and the choices you make when no one is watching. In the moments where you are faced with a decision between what is easy and what is necessary. The first step is simple, but it requires honesty. You have to start noticing where you are choosing comfort over growth, not in a general sense, but in very specific moments. The times where you delay something important because you don't feel like doing it. The times where you avoid a difficult conversation because it feels uncomfortable. The times where you stay in situations that no longer challenge you because they feel safe. These moments are everywhere. Most of the time, they pass without you even thinking about them. They feel normal. But once you start paying attention, you realize how often they happen. And each one of those moments is a small decision. It may not seem significant on its own, but over time, those decisions shape you. They reinforce a pattern. They teach you what to do when something feels uncomfortable. And if the answer is always to move away from it, then that becomes your default. Rejecting comfort as the goal doesn't mean removing comfort from your life completely. It means changing your relationship with it. It means no longer seeing it as something you should constantly chase. It means being willing to step away from it when necessary, even when it feels easier to stay. This is where the second step begins. You start choosing voluntary struggle. Not because you enjoy suffering, not because you are trying to make life harder for no reason, but because you understand what it builds. You begin to introduce difficulty into your life on purpose. You stop waiting for challenges to appear and start creating them yourself. You train yourself physically. You push your body beyond what feels comfortable. You move even when you don't feel like it. You build discipline not through motivation, but through repetition. You show yourself that you can act even when your mind resists. You train yourself mentally. You focus on things that require effort. You avoid constant distraction. You sit with difficult thoughts instead of escaping them. You develop the ability to concentrate, to stay present, to think clearly even when things feel overwhelming. And you train yourself emotionally. You face situations that make you uncomfortable. You have conversations you would normally avoid. You put yourself in positions where you might fail, where you might be judged, where you might feel uncertain. Not to prove something to others, but to expand your own capacity. At first, this feels unnatural. There is resistance. Your mind will look for ways to avoid it. It will tell you that you can do it later, that it's not necessary, that you deserve to rest, to stay comfortable, to take the easier path. But if you keep choosing the harder option, something begins to change. Your tolerance increases. What once felt difficult becomes manageable. What once felt overwhelming becomes something you can handle. And slowly, your limits start to expand. This is where the idea of amor fati comes in. From Ecce Homo, Why I Am So Clever, Section 10. My formula for greatness in a human being is amor fati, that one wants nothing to be different, not forward, not backward, not in all eternity. This idea goes even deeper than simply accepting hardship. It is not about enduring difficulty while wishing things were different. It is not about tolerating pain while waiting for it to pass. It is about something much more complete. It is about accepting everything that happens as part of your path. The setbacks, the failures, the uncomfortable moments, the situations you did not choose, the things that do not go according to plan. Instead of resisting them, instead of wishing they didn't happen, you begin to see them as necessary. Not because they are pleasant, but because they shape you. When something difficult happens, your instinct is to reject it, to think, this shouldn't be happening, to look for a way out. But Amor Fati asks you to take a different approach. It asks you to accept it fully, to see it as something that belongs to your life, something that has a role in your development. That shift changes how you experience difficulty. Instead of feeling like something is going wrong, you start to see it as something that is happening for a reason, not in a passive way, but in a way that gives you responsibility. You ask yourself how you can use it, how you can grow from it, how it can make you stronger. You don't just endure what happens, you integrate it. And that gives you a kind of stability that does not depend on circumstances. Because whatever happens, you know it can be used. Whatever happens, you know it can contribute to your growth. From there, the final step becomes clear. You redefine your standard. You stop asking, "Am I happy?" Because that question is unstable. It changes from moment to moment. It depends on how you feel, on what is happening around you, on things that are not always in your control. Instead, you begin asking better questions. Am I growing? Am I stronger than before? These questions shift your focus completely. They move your attention away from temporary feelings and toward long-term development. They force you to evaluate your life based on progress, not comfort. Based on effort, not ease. And once you start thinking this way, your priorities begin to change. You start valuing things differently. You respect discipline more than pleasure. You respect effort more than comfort. You respect progress more than immediate satisfaction. The things that once felt important begin to lose their weight, and new things take their place. This is where the transformation happens. Not all at once, not in a dramatic moment, but gradually, through repeated actions, through consistent choices, through the accumulation of small decisions that move you in a different direction. You become more resilient, not because life becomes easier, but because you become more capable of handling what comes your way. You become more independent, not because you isolate yourself from others, but because your sense of stability no longer depends on external validation or perfect conditions. You become more focused, not because distractions disappear, but because you learn to prioritize what matters over what feels good in the moment. And over time, you begin to notice something. You no longer feel controlled by the need for comfort. You are not constantly looking for the easiest path. You are not avoiding difficulty at all costs. You are moving forward with intention, with direction, with a clear sense of what you are building. That is where this path leads. And it brings you back to the beginning, but with a different understanding. You were never meant to live a life of constant comfort. You were never meant to avoid struggle. You were meant to face it, shape it, and rise through it. That is what gives life weight. That is what gives it meaning. Not the absence of difficulty, but the way you engage with it. Nietzsche captures this idea in a final image. In Thus Spoke Zarathustra, he wrote, "What is great in man is that he is a bridge and not an end." You are not something finished. You are not something static. You are something in transition, something that can move forward, that can evolve, that can become more than it currently is. And that process never really ends. There is always another level, another challenge, another version of yourself that can be built. So stop chasing happiness and start becoming someone greater than you were yesterday. There is a strange prison that most people live inside, yet almost nobody sees the bars. It has no walls, no guards, and no locked doors. You cannot touch it, yet it quietly shapes almost every decision a person makes. It determines what people say, how they behave, what dreams they pursue, and which dreams they abandon. This prison is built from something surprisingly fragile: the opinions of other people. Most people never truly live their own lives. They believe they are making independent choices. but beneath the surface, many of those choices are guided by a silent question that follows them everywhere. It appears when they consider speaking their mind. It appears when they think about pursuing an unusual path. It appears when they want to express their true personality. And that question is simple. What will people think? From the moment we enter the world, we are trained to seek approval. As children, we learn quickly that approval brings rewards. Parents approve when we behave properly. Teachers approve when we give the right answers. Friends approve when we fit in with the group. Society approves when we follow the expected path. Over time, this constant feedback shapes the way we see ourselves. Slowly, almost without noticing it, we internalize a dangerous belief that our value depends on what other people think of us. This belief begins to create invisible chains. People start filtering their thoughts before speaking them. They silence ideas that might sound strange or unpopular. They hide parts of their personality that might attract criticism. They suppress ambitions that seem too risky or unconventional. Instead of following their curiosity, they follow the safest path available. Many people choose careers that feel acceptable rather than meaningful. They adopt opinions that feel socially comfortable rather than intellectually honest. They present a carefully edited version of themselves to the world. On the surface, everything appears normal, but underneath there is a quiet tension, a constant negotiation between what a person truly wants and what they believe others will accept. And gradually, the most important question in their life changes. Instead of asking, "Is this what I want?" they begin asking, "What will people think?" This quiet fear becomes the silent ruler of their life. It influences decisions about relationships, ambitions, creativity, and self-expression. Entire lives are shaped not by conviction, but by the anticipation of judgment. Yet when we look at the individuals who truly shaped history, we notice something different about them. The thinkers, artists, innovators, and philosophers who changed the world all shared a rare trait. They refused to let the opinions of the crowd define their path. At some point in their lives, they stopped asking for permission to exist. Philosophy has been teaching this lesson for thousands of years. Some of the greatest thinkers in history explored the problem of social approval and the fear of judgment. And a few philosophers pushed this idea further than anyone else, showing that freedom begins the moment a person learns to step outside the prison of other people's opinions. The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer had a very clear understanding of one uncomfortable aspect of human psychology. He noticed that people spend a surprising amount of their mental energy worrying about how they appear in the eyes of others. Reputation becomes a silent obsession. Even people who claim to be independent often shape their behavior around the reactions of those watching them. They adjust their opinions depending on the room they are in. They soften their beliefs when they sense disapproval. They hesitate before speaking honestly if the truth might damage the image they have carefully built in the minds of others. Schopenhauer believed that this constant concern with reputation quietly dominates human behavior. Many individuals appear confident on the surface, but internally they remain extremely sensitive to judgment. A passing comment can disturb them for hours. A small criticism can linger in their mind long after it was spoken. A stranger's opinion online can affect their mood for an entire day. It is a strange condition. The thoughts of people we barely know often occupy more space in our minds than our own convictions. To Schopenhauer, this pattern revealed something deeply irrational. He argued that the opinions of other people are unstable and unreliable. Public judgment changes constantly. A person who is praised today may be criticized tomorrow. The same crowd that celebrates someone's success can quickly turn against them when the mood shifts. Reputation rises and falls according to trends, gossip, misunderstandings, and emotional reactions. These forces have very little to do with truth or character. They are shaped by temporary moods and collective impulses that move through groups of people. Because of this instability, Schopenhauer believed it is extremely dangerous to treat public opinion as a guide for one's life. When a person builds their identity around approval, they place their peace of mind in the hands of a constantly shifting crowd. Their emotional stability begins to depend on forces they cannot control. Praise creates excitement. Criticism creates anxiety. Silence creates insecurity. The individual becomes like a performer standing on a stage, watching the audience carefully and adjusting every movement in response to the reactions in the room. Schopenhauer expressed this insight very simply when he wrote, "We care far too much about what others think of us." In that sentence, he captured one of the most common weaknesses in human nature. People imagine that reputation determines their worth. They imagine that being admired guarantees happiness. They imagine that avoiding criticism protects them from discomfort. Because of this belief, they spend enormous effort managing impressions. They construct identities designed to attract approval. They present versions of themselves that feel socially acceptable. They carefully avoid actions that might provoke judgment. This effort gradually becomes a form of mental slavery. A person who constantly monitors the reactions of others loses something essential: independence of mind. Their decisions begin to shift away from personal conviction and towards social acceptance. The question guiding their behavior changes. Instead of asking what they believe is right, they begin asking what will be received positively. Instead of expressing their genuine thoughts, they search for the safest response. Instead of following curiosity or ambition, they follow the path that attracts the least criticism. Schopenhauer saw this transformation happening everywhere around him. He believed that many people live as though an invisible audience is watching them at every moment. They imagine observers analyzing their choices, evaluating their appearance, judging their intelligence, and measuring their success. In reality, most of this audience exists only in the imagination. The mind creates a constant sense of observation even when no one is paying attention. The truth is much simpler and less dramatic. Most people are deeply occupied with their own lives. They worry about their own problems, their own ambitions, their own insecurities. They are thinking about their work, their relationships, their financial struggles, their personal concerns. The idea that strangers are constantly analyzing every detail of our behavior is largely an illusion created by our own self-consciousness. Schopenhauer believed that once a person clearly sees this illusion, something very interesting begins to happen inside the mind. The pressure to perform slowly weakens. The imagined audience loses its authority. A person starts noticing how many of their fears were based on exaggerated assumptions about the attention of others. Situations that once felt intimidating begin to feel strangely ordinary. This realization can feel unsettling at first because it removes a familiar reference point. Many individuals have spent years organizing their lives around approval. They measure progress by recognition. They measure success by praise. When that framework begins to dissolve, a person must confront a deeper question that was previously hidden by the noise of public judgment. That question is simple but powerful. What do I actually believe? Schopenhauer encouraged people to cultivate a certain distance from the opinions of the crowd. He believed that treating public opinion with a degree of indifference allows a person to recover their independence. Indifference in this sense does not mean hostility toward others or a refusal to listen. It simply means refusing to allow reputation to control one's inner life. When someone stops depending on approval, their actions begin to change. They speak more honestly because they no longer feel the need to protect a fragile image. They explore ideas more freely because disagreement no longer feels like a personal threat. They pursue interests that genuinely attract them instead of those that appear impressive to others. Decisions begin to come from internal reasoning rather than social pressure. This shift creates a quiet form of strength. A person who is less concerned with reputation becomes harder to manipulate. Praise loses some of its power because it is no longer necessary for self-worth. Criticism loses some of its sting because it no longer defines identity. The emotional turbulence created by public judgment begins to calm. Schopenhauer believed that the mind becomes clearer under these conditions. When reputation is no longer the central concern, attention moves toward deeper questions about knowledge, character, and purpose. A person becomes more interested in understanding the world than in impressing it. Curiosity replaces performance. Reflection replaces constant comparison. Over time, this attitude produces a different relationship with society. Instead of constantly adjusting to fit expectations, the individual stands on their own reasoning. They still interact with others and participate in the world, but their inner direction no longer depends on applause or criticism. They become capable of holding unpopular opinions without anxiety and pursuing meaningful goals even when recognition is slow or uncertain. For Schopenhauer, this independence was essential for anyone seeking intellectual or personal development. He believed that genuine thinking requires a certain distance from the pressure of public judgment. When the mind is preoccupied with reputation, it struggles to examine ideas honestly. Fear of criticism interferes with curiosity. Desire for praise distorts reasoning. The individual who loosens the grip of public opinion gains access to something more valuable than approval. They gain the ability to live according to truth as they understand it. Their thoughts become their own. Their actions reflect personal conviction rather than social choreography. This is the strange freedom that Schopenhauer believed many people overlook. The crowd never had as much power as we imagined. Much of its authority exists only in our minds. When that illusion begins to fade, a person no longer feels compelled to perform for an audience that was never really watching in the first place. And with that realization, life starts to feel different. The constant tension of reputation slowly dissolves. The mind becomes quieter. Decisions feel clearer. A person stops shaping every action around the anticipated reactions of others. They step away from the restless noise of approval and criticism. And in that silence, something far more stable begins to guide their life: the search for truth. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche looked at human behavior and noticed something deeper than simple concern for reputation. He believed that society itself quietly pushes individuals toward conformity. This pressure does not always appear through laws or direct commands. Much of the time it appears through subtle expectations, social habits, and the desire to belong. People naturally seek acceptance within groups, and this instinct makes them sensitive to the moods and judgments of those around them. Over time, the individual begins to shape their behavior in ways that feel familiar and safe to the group. Nietzsche used the image of the herd to describe this social pattern. The herd values safety and predictability. It prefers stability over experimentation. It favors ideas that feel comfortable and familiar. When a person expresses an unusual opinion or pursues an unconventional path, the herd often reacts with suspicion. The reaction may appear as criticism, ridicule, or moral judgment. A person who challenges accepted beliefs may quickly find themselves labeled as strange, arrogant, irresponsible, or dangerous. According to Nietzsche, this reaction is not random. It serves a function within groups. Communities maintain stability by encouraging shared values and discouraging behaviors that deviate too far from the norm. When someone steps outside these expectations, the group instinctively tries to pull them back. Social pressure becomes a kind of invisible gravity that keeps individuals orbiting around the same habits and assumptions. Nietzsche described this dynamic clearly when he wrote, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." In that short sentence, he captured the tension between personal independence and social belonging. The tribe offers security, cooperation, and familiarity. At the same time, it places limits on how far an individual can wander from accepted ideas without encountering resistance. Most people respond to this tension by choosing safety. They learn early that standing out carries consequences. A child who asks unusual questions may be laughed at. A student who challenges authority may be labeled difficult. An adult who chooses an unconventional career may face constant skepticism from friends and family. These experiences slowly shape behavior. Many individuals begin adjusting themselves to avoid unnecessary friction with the group. Over time, this adjustment becomes so natural that people rarely notice it happening. They adopt opinions that match the tone of their environment. They imitate the attitudes of those around them. They repeat ideas that sound reasonable within their social circle. Their identity becomes intertwined with the expectations of the group, and the boundaries of acceptable thought quietly narrow. Nietzsche believed that this process suppresses individuality. Human beings possess unique perspectives, talents, and creative impulses. When those impulses are constantly filtered through the expectations of the herd, much of that individuality remains unexplored. The person becomes socially acceptable, but internally divided. They learn to express only the parts of themselves that feel safe. For Nietzsche, this represented a major loss of potential. He believed that genuine creativity and intellectual progress come from individuals who are willing to think beyond the limits of accepted opinion. New ideas rarely appear from complete agreement with the past. They often begin as uncomfortable questions that challenge familiar assumptions. The person who dares to ask these questions inevitably encounters resistance. Because of this, Nietzsche believed that anyone seeking personal development must eventually confront the pressure of the herd directly. At some point, a person must decide whether they will organize their life around social approval or around their own evolving understanding of the world. This decision is rarely easy. It requires accepting certain realities about human relationships. One of those realities is that independence often produces misunderstanding. When someone begins thinking differently from the majority, their perspective may appear strange or threatening to those who remain attached to familiar ideas. The individual may be criticized or dismissed. Friends may question their choices. Family members may worry that they are making mistakes. These reactions are part of the social mechanism that maintains stability within groups. Nietzsche believed that individuals seeking genuine growth must prepare themselves for this experience. The path toward independence includes moments of discomfort. A person may feel isolated when their ideas no longer align with the opinions of those around them. They may face ridicule when exploring new ways of thinking. They may encounter rejection from groups that once felt comfortable and supportive. Many people avoid this experience entirely by returning quickly to the safety of the herd. The discomfort of standing apart can feel overwhelming, especially when social approval has been the foundation of identity for many years. Returning to familiar expectations restores harmony with the group, but it also restores the boundaries that limit individuality. Nietzsche believed that greatness requires a different response. The individual must develop the courage to continue exploring their own path, even when approval becomes uncertain. This courage does not come from arrogance or hostility toward others. It comes from a deep commitment to personal development and intellectual honesty. The individual becomes willing to examine ideas independently, rather than simply adopting the beliefs that surround them. For Nietzsche, this process involved creating one's own values. Many social values are inherited without much reflection. People absorb them through culture, tradition, and education. These inherited beliefs can be useful, but they often remain unexamined. Nietzsche believed that individuals capable of deeper development must eventually question these inherited frameworks and decide which values genuinely reflect their understanding of life. Creating personal values requires careful reflection. A person must examine their experiences, their goals, and their observations about the world. They must decide what they consider meaningful, what they consider admirable, and what they consider worth pursuing. This process demands intellectual honesty because it cannot rely on automatic agreement with the majority. Nietzsche summarized this journey in one of his most famous statements: "Become who you are." This phrase expresses the idea that individuality is not something given automatically at birth. It develops gradually as a person examines their beliefs, tests their assumptions, and refines their character through experience. Becoming oneself requires effort because it involves separating personal conviction from the expectations of the herd. The person who follows this path gradually develops a stronger internal compass. Their decisions become guided less by external approval and more by personal understanding. They begin evaluating ideas according to their own reasoning rather than according to popularity. They explore interests that feel meaningful even when those interests appear unusual to others. This independence does not require complete isolation from society. Human beings remain social creatures who benefit from cooperation and communication. Nietzsche did not suggest abandoning all relationships or rejecting every tradition. His point concerned the direction of influence. Instead of allowing society to dictate every aspect of identity, the individual learns to engage with society from a position of internal strength. When this shift occurs, a person becomes less vulnerable to the emotional turbulence of public opinion. Praise no longer defines their worth. Criticism no longer determines their path. They can listen to others without feeling compelled to agree automatically. They can participate in conversations without surrendering their independent judgment. Over time, this independence often leads to a deeper sense of self-knowledge. The individual begins noticing patterns in their thinking and behavior that were previously hidden beneath social expectations. They discover interests and talents that may have remained dormant under the pressure to conform. Their life becomes an ongoing process of exploration, rather than a performance designed to satisfy an audience. Nietzsche believed that only individuals willing to step beyond the herd experience this level of self-discovery. Conformity provides comfort and stability, but it rarely leads to the development of unique perspectives. Those perspectives emerge when individuals experiment with ideas, question accepted beliefs, and pursue goals that feel meaningful to them personally. The process requires strength because social pressure does not disappear easily. The herd continues to exist, and it continues to reward conformity. Yet the individual who has learned to stand apart gradually develops resilience. They become capable of hearing disagreement without abandoning their convictions. They remain open to learning while maintaining the independence necessary for genuine growth. For Nietzsche, this courage represented one of the most important qualities a person could cultivate. The world often rewards those who follow established patterns, but the individuals who shape history tend to be those who think beyond them. Their independence allows them to see possibilities that remain invisible within the boundaries of the herd. And in that independence, the individual begins the long and demanding journey of discovering who they truly are. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus approached the problem of public opinion in a very different way. While thinkers like Schopenhauer analyzed the irrationality of reputation, and Nietzsche exposed the pressure of the herd, Epictetus focused on something far more practical: how a person can actually free their mind from this pressure in everyday life. His philosophy was designed to help individuals remain calm and stable in a world full of uncertainty, criticism, and changing circumstances. Epictetus understood that human beings often suffer because they place their attention on things they cannot control. When the mind becomes attached to these uncontrollable things, anxiety naturally follows. A person begins trying to manage outcomes that are completely outside their influence. They worry about how situations will unfold, how people will react, and how their reputation will be judged. The more they try to control these external factors, the more tension they experience. One of the most obvious examples of this pattern appears in the way people think about the opinions of others. A person may spend hours wondering what someone else thinks about them. They replay conversations in their mind, searching for hidden meanings. They analyze facial expressions and tones of voice. They imagine how others are evaluating their actions. This mental habit slowly drains their energy and creates constant emotional instability. Epictetus believed that this entire struggle comes from a misunderstanding about control. He taught that life becomes much clearer when we divide everything in the world into two categories: things that belong to us and things that do not belong to us. This distinction may sound simple at first, but it has enormous consequences when someone truly understands it. According to Epictetus, certain things belong completely to us. Our actions belong to us. Our choices belong to us. Our intentions belong to us. Our character belongs to us. These elements are under our direct influence. We can examine them, refine them, and improve them through practice and reflection. At the same time, many things in life do not belong to us at all. The reactions of other people fall into this category. A person cannot control what another person thinks. They cannot control the words others decide to speak. They cannot control how their actions will be interpreted. Every individual carries their own perspective, their own experiences, and their own biases. These factors shape their judgments in ways that are completely outside our influence. When someone tries to control these external factors, frustration appears immediately. Imagine trying to manage the thoughts of every person who encounters you during the day. Imagine trying to ensure that every observer interprets your behavior positively. Such a task would be impossible. The mind would constantly be chasing approval that may never come. Epictetus believed that many people unknowingly create this impossible task for themselves. They tie their emotional well-being to the reactions of others. When praise appears, they feel confident. When criticism appears, they feel wounded. Their sense of stability rises and falls depending on forces that are completely outside their control. The Stoic solution begins with a shift in attention. Instead of trying to influence everything that happens around us, Epictetus encouraged people to focus entirely on what truly belongs to them. This means directing energy toward personal conduct rather than toward reputation. A person begins asking different questions. Instead of asking whether others approve, they ask whether their actions reflect integrity. Instead of wondering how they appear, they examine whether their choices align with their principles. This approach removes a tremendous burden from the mind. The person no longer feels responsible for the unpredictable reactions of others. Their task becomes much simpler and more manageable. They concentrate on behaving with honesty, discipline, and clarity. The rest of the world is allowed to respond however it wishes. Epictetus captured this attitude in one of his most famous statements. If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid. At first, this sentence may sound harsh or discouraging, but its meaning is actually very liberating. Epictetus understood that anyone pursuing personal growth will eventually encounter misunderstanding. When a person begins thinking independently, some observers will interpret that independence as arrogance or foolishness. When someone follows an unusual path, others may assume they are making mistakes. These reactions are natural because people judge situations from their own perspectives. They see only fragments of another person's reasoning and experience. Because of this limited view, their conclusions often miss the full picture. Epictetus believed that accepting this reality allows a person to move forward without constant hesitation. A person who accepts the possibility of criticism becomes far more resilient. They understand that misunderstanding is part of life rather than a sign of failure. They no longer treat every negative opinion as a personal threat. Instead, they evaluate criticism calmly. If a comment contains useful insight, they can learn from it. If it is based on misunderstanding or bias, they can simply let it pass. This attitude produces a noticeable change in emotional stability. The mind becomes less reactive because it is no longer trying to control external judgments. Praise does not create excessive excitement. Criticism does not create intense frustration. The individual remains steady because their focus stays on their own conduct. Another interesting effect appears as well. When someone stops depending on approval, they become much harder to manipulate. Many forms of social pressure rely on the fear of judgment. People are often persuaded to act against their better judgment because they fear embarrassment or rejection. A person who has learned the Stoic distinction between control and external events is less vulnerable to this pressure. Their decisions are guided by their principles rather than by the immediate reactions of others. Over time, this independence creates a deeper sense of inner freedom. The person begins to experience life with less tension. Conversations feel more relaxed because there is no constant need to impress anyone. Decisions become clearer because they are guided by personal reasoning rather than by speculation about public opinion. The mind becomes quieter because it is no longer constantly imagining the judgments of others. Epictetus believed that this inner freedom represents one of the most valuable achievements in life. A person who governs their own actions while accepting the unpredictability of external events develops a powerful form of stability. Their peace of mind does not depend on popularity, approval, or reputation. It depends only on their own commitment to living with integrity. This does not mean ignoring other people completely. Stoicism does not encourage isolation or arrogance. Epictetus valued community and cooperation. What he rejected was the idea that our identity should depend on the constantly shifting opinions of others. He believed that the respect for others becomes healthier when it grows from genuine understanding rather than from fear of judgment. When someone fully internalizes the Stoic perspective, daily life begins to feel different. Situations that once created anxiety lose their intensity. The individual can speak honestly without constantly measuring how every word will be received. They can pursue meaningful goals without worrying whether those goals will impress the crowd. They can accept criticism without feeling personally diminished. In this state, the mind regains a sense of balance. Attention returns to the present moment and to the actions that truly belong to the individual. The noise of external judgment fades into the background. What remains is a steady commitment to personal character. For Epictetus, this is where real freedom begins. Not in controlling the world around us, but in mastering the part of life that truly belongs to us, our own choices. Among all the philosophers who challenged society's obsession with reputation, none pushed the idea as far as Diogenes. While others analyzed the problem or offered strategies for dealing with it, Diogenes attacked it directly with his entire life. His philosophy was not just something he spoke about in discussions or wrote down in books. He turned his life itself into a demonstration of what freedom from social approval could look like. Diogenes believed that many of the rules people follow are artificial. They are not rooted in nature or necessity. They are habits created by society that people obey without questioning them. These rules shape how people dress, how they behave in public, how they speak, what they value, and what they avoid. Over time, these customs become so normal that people stop noticing them. They begin to treat them as if they are natural laws. One of the strongest forces maintaining these customs is the fear of embarrassment. People constantly adjust their behavior to avoid looking foolish in the eyes of others. They worry about appearing strange. They worry about appearing unsuccessful. They worry about appearing different. Much of daily behavior becomes a performance designed to protect reputation. Diogenes believed that this fear quietly enslaves people. When someone organizes their life around maintaining respectability, they begin living according to external expectations rather than according to their own judgment. Their actions become constrained by invisible boundaries created by social opinion. They may believe they are free, but in reality, their behavior is carefully shaped by the need to appear acceptable. To expose this problem, Diogenes chose a radical path. He stripped away almost everything that society considered important. He rejected wealth, status, and comfort. He chose to live with extreme simplicity, often sleeping in what was described as a large storage jar or barrel in the streets of Athens. Instead of working to accumulate possessions, he believed that freedom increases when a person reduces unnecessary needs. This lifestyle shocked many people who encountered him. Athens was a city that valued reputation, public recognition, and social standing. Citizens took pride in their achievements and their status within the community. Diogenes ignored these concerns completely. He did not attempt to impress anyone. He did not try to maintain a respectable image. He spoke bluntly and behaved in ways that ignored the expectations of polite society. His actions often appeared outrageous. He openly criticized wealthy citizens and mocked individuals who took their social position too seriously. He ridiculed people who spent enormous effort maintaining appearances while neglecting deeper questions about character and honesty. To many observers, he looked like a madman wandering through the city. Yet Diogenes was not behaving randomly. Every unusual action carried a philosophical message. By ignoring social conventions, he revealed how fragile those conventions actually were. People reacted strongly to his behavior because it violated expectations that they rarely questioned. Diogenes used this reaction to show how deeply people were attached to the approval of others. One of the most famous stories about him illustrates this point clearly. During the daytime, when the sun was already bright, Diogenes walked through the streets of Athens carrying a lantern. Curious citizens asked him why he was searching with a lamp when there was already plenty of light. Diogenes responded with a simple statement: "I am searching for an honest man." The image was humorous, but the message was serious. Diogenes believed that many people were more concerned with appearing respectable than with actually being honest. Reputation had become more important than character. People polished their image while hiding their weaknesses and pretending to be something they were not. The lantern symbolized his search for genuine integrity in a city filled with performance. Diogenes also challenged powerful figures without hesitation. One famous encounter involved Alexander the Great, who had heard about the strange philosopher and decided to visit him. When Alexander approached, he reportedly asked Diogenes if there was anything he could do for him. Most people would have treated the ruler with great respect and gratitude. Diogenes simply replied, "Yes, stand out of my sunlight." This response shocked those present. Speaking so casually to the most powerful man in the known world seemed almost unimaginable. Yet the exchange captured the essence of Diogenes' philosophy. Because he had rejected wealth, status, and reputation, he had nothing to gain from flattering authority. He did not fear losing social position because he had already abandoned it. His independence made him immune to the pressures that controlled others. Diogenes wanted to demonstrate how much of human behavior is driven by the fear of embarrassment. People often avoid authentic actions because they imagine how others might react. They hesitate before speaking honestly because they fear looking foolish. They suppress unconventional ideas because they fear ridicule. This fear shapes countless small decisions throughout life. Diogenes decided to remove this fear entirely. He behaved with complete shamelessness, not in the sense of cruelty or recklessness, but in the sense of refusing to hide behind artificial social masks. If he had something to say, he said it directly. If a custom appeared meaningless to him, he ignored it openly. His behavior forced observers to confront their own attachment to social approval. For many people, this attachment is so strong that they rarely question it. They follow social patterns automatically because they want to avoid standing out. They choose clothing, hobbies, careers, and lifestyles that align with expectations. The possibility of looking foolish can feel more frightening than the possibility of living inauthentically. Diogenes saw this fear as one of the greatest obstacles to freedom. As long as a person depends on reputation for their sense of worth, they remain vulnerable to social pressure. Their choices are shaped by the reactions they anticipate from others. Even when they disagree internally, they may conform externally to avoid discomfort. By rejecting these pressures completely, Diogenes reached a level of independence that very few people experience. Because he had nothing to protect, no reputation to maintain, and no possessions to defend, society had very little leverage over him. Threats carried no weight. Praise carried no attraction. His life was guided entirely by his own reasoning about what mattered. This extreme freedom came with obvious costs. Many people treated him with hostility or ridicule. His lifestyle offered none of the comforts that most individuals seek. Yet Diogenes accepted these consequences because he believed they were a small price for independence. In his view, the ability to live without fear of judgment was more valuable than comfort or admiration. The lesson of Diogenes does not require anyone to imitate his lifestyle completely. Few people would choose to abandon all possessions and live in the streets to prove a philosophical point. What his example reveals is something deeper about the relationship between reputation and freedom. Every time a person refuses to express themselves because they fear embarrassment, a small piece of freedom disappears. Every time someone hides their honest opinion to protect their image, the influence of the crowd grows stronger. Over time, these small concessions shape entire lives. Diogenes shows what happens when that influence disappears entirely. When reputation no longer matters, behavior becomes direct and authentic. Decisions come from personal judgment rather than social calculation. The individual stops performing and begins simply living according to their understanding of the world. His shamelessness created a kind of armor against social pressure. Without the need to impress anyone, criticism lost its power. Without a reputation to defend, mockery became meaningless. Without possessions to lose, threats carried no force. This combination produced total independence. In that independence, Diogenes became impossible to control. Understanding these philosophical ideas can be powerful, but insight alone rarely changes behavior. Many people agree with these principles intellectually, yet still feel controlled by the opinions of others in their everyday lives. This happens because the habit of seeking approval has been developing for years. It was reinforced in childhood through rewards and punishments. It was strengthened through social interactions, education, and cultural expectations. Over time, it becomes almost automatic. A person begins filtering their actions through the imagined reactions of others without even realizing they are doing it. Because of this, freedom from the opinions of others cannot come from understanding alone. It comes from deliberate practice. Just like any habit, the habit of seeking approval can be weakened and replaced, but it requires consistent effort. The mind must gradually learn that disapproval is not as dangerous as it once believed. That learning process happens through small, repeated experiences where a person acts independently and discovers that the consequences are far less dramatic than their fears predicted. The first step in this process is awareness. Before anything can change, a person must begin observing how often their decisions are shaped by imagined judgment. This requires honest attention to everyday behavior. Many people are surprised when they start noticing how frequently this pattern appears. It shows up in small moments that usually pass unnoticed. A person may hesitate before expressing a genuine opinion in a conversation. They may avoid asking a question because they fear it might sound unintelligent. They may choose clothing that feels safe rather than clothing they actually enjoy. They may hold back from pursuing an interest because it might seem strange to others. These small hesitations reveal how much influence imagined judgment can have. The mind often creates an invisible audience that seems to watch every action. Once someone begins paying attention to this pattern, they start recognizing how often the question, "What will people think?" quietly shapes their behavior. Awareness alone already weakens the habit slightly because it exposes the automatic process that normally operates in the background. After awareness comes the second step, exposure. The fear of judgment survives because people rarely confront it directly. They avoid situations where embarrassment might occur, which prevents the mind from learning that such situations are survivable. Exposure works by gradually challenging this fear through small, deliberate actions. These actions do not need to be dramatic. In fact, they are most effective when they are simple and manageable. A person might start by expressing their honest opinion in a conversation where they would normally stay silent. They might choose clothing that reflects their personal taste rather than what feels socially safe. They might pursue a hobby that interests them even if others consider it unusual. They might speak openly about an idea they care about instead of waiting for approval. Each of these actions produces a small moment of discomfort. The heart may beat faster. The mind may imagine negative reactions from others. This discomfort is natural because the brain has been trained to associate social disapproval with danger. However, when a person continues through the discomfort and observes the actual outcome, something interesting happens. In most cases, the reaction from others is far less dramatic than the mind predicted. Sometimes people will not notice at all. Sometimes they will respond neutrally. Occasionally someone may disagree or react negatively, but even then, the situation usually passes quickly. Life continues. The feared catastrophe rarely appears. Through repeated exposure, the brain begins updating its expectations. The fear gradually loses its intensity. This process is similar to strengthening a muscle. At first, the effort feels uncomfortable, but with repetition, the activity becomes easier. Over time, the individual becomes more relaxed in situations that once produced anxiety. Speaking honestly feels more natural. Pursuing personal interests becomes less intimidating. The imagined audience begins to fade as the mind realizes that most people are not paying nearly as much attention as it once believed. The third step in this process involves developing internal standards. As the influence of external approval weakens, a new guiding structure must take its place. Without such a structure, a person might simply drift without direction. Internal standards provide a stable reference point that helps guide decisions. These standards come from personal principles and values rather than from social expectations. A person begins asking different questions before making decisions. Instead of asking whether something will impress others, they ask whether it aligns with the kind of person they want to become. They reflect on what qualities they admire in themselves and in others. Integrity, honesty, courage, curiosity, discipline, and compassion are examples of principles that many people value deeply. When decisions are guided by these principles, external opinions become less important. The individual measures their actions against their own values rather than against the unpredictable reactions of the crowd. This approach creates a sense of stability because personal principles remain relatively constant while public opinion constantly changes. Developing internal standards requires reflection. A person must spend time thinking about what truly matters to them. They must examine their beliefs and decide which values they want to cultivate in their life. This reflection gradually strengthens their internal compass. When difficult decisions appear, they can rely on this compass rather than searching for approval. The final step in this process involves acceptance. Even after developing awareness, practicing exposure, and establishing internal standards, the opinions of others will still exist. Criticism will still appear from time to time. Misunderstandings will still occur. No philosophy can remove these experiences completely because they are part of living among other human beings. Acceptance means recognizing a simple truth about social life. No matter what a person does, someone will disapprove. If someone succeeds, there will always be individuals who feel envy or resentment. If someone fails, there will always be individuals who feel justified in their criticism. If someone expresses strong opinions, there will always be those who disagree. Even remaining silent can attract judgment from people who interpret silence as weakness or indifference. Trying to satisfy every possible observer is impossible. The number of opinions in the world is far too large and far too diverse. Attempting to manage them all would require constantly changing one's behavior depending on the audience. Such an effort would leave a person exhausted and internally divided. Acceptance frees the mind from this impossible task. Once a person clearly understands that universal approval cannot exist, the pressure to pursue it begins to dissolve. Decisions become simpler because they are no longer measured against an unrealistic standard. The individual focuses instead on living in a way that feels honest and meaningful according to their own principles. This shift produces a subtle but powerful transformation in the way a person moves through the world. They stop constantly scanning the environment for signs of approval or disapproval. Conversations become more natural because they are not carefully engineered to produce admiration. Creative ideas emerge more freely because the mind is no longer busy filtering every thought through imagined reactions. Over time, this new way of living produces a quiet form of confidence. It does not rely on loud displays or constant self-promotion. It grows from the knowledge that one's actions are guided by personal conviction rather than by fear of judgment. The individual no longer feels the need to apologize for being different or to shrink themselves to fit expectations. This confidence often appears calm and understated. It does not seek attention, yet it naturally commands respect because it reflects genuine independence. Others can sense when someone is no longer performing for approval. There is a clarity in their behavior that feels stable and authentic. At this stage, the individual begins experiencing life with a new kind of freedom. They still care about treating others with respect and fairness, but they no longer sacrifice their identity to avoid criticism. Their actions come from a deeper place within themselves. And in that freedom, a person finally begins living in a way that no longer asks for permission to exist. Every human being struggles with the same invisible habit. We hold on. We hold on to expectations, to plans, to people, to outcomes that we believe should happen. Somewhere in the mind, there is a quiet belief that life should unfold according to the picture we have created for it. We imagine how things should go. We imagine how people should treat us. We imagine where we should be in 5 years, what success should look like, how relationships should feel, how the future should unfold. These images become deeply rooted in the mind. Over time, they stop feeling like hopes and begin to feel like guarantees. And when reality begins to move in a different direction, the mind resists. This resistance is where suffering begins. Most people do not notice that this process is happening. They simply feel the emotional consequences of it. Frustration appears when a plan collapses. Anger appears when someone behaves in a way we did not expect. Anxiety appears when the future becomes uncertain. Regret appears when the past cannot be changed. It feels as though these emotions are caused by the events themselves. Someone betrayed you, a project failed, a relationship ended, an opportunity disappeared. The mind immediately points to the event and says that this is the reason you are suffering. But the Stoics saw something deeper in this process. They observed that the same event can produce completely different reactions in different people. One person loses money and collapses into panic. Another person loses money and calmly begins rebuilding. One person receives criticism and feels humiliated for weeks. Another person hears the same criticism and simply shrugs. One person experiences rejection and feels devastated. Another person experiences rejection and moves forward without much disturbance. The event itself is the same. The difference lies in the interpretation. The Stoics believed that much of human suffering does not come directly from events. It comes from the judgments we place on those events. The mind constantly tells stories about what is happening. It decides whether something is good or bad, fair or unfair, deserved or undeserved. These judgments shape the emotional response that follows. Once the mind labels something as a disaster, the emotions quickly follow that conclusion. This is why people become so deeply affected by things they cannot control. Think about how much emotional energy people spend worrying about the opinions of others. Reputation becomes something people desperately try to manage. They worry about what co-workers think of them, what friends think of them, what strangers online think of them. A single negative comment can stay in the mind for days. Yet the opinions of others are never truly within our control. Every person sees the world through their own experiences, their own biases, their own moods. Someone may dislike you simply because they had a bad day. Someone may misunderstand your actions. Someone may project their own insecurities onto you. Trying to control how others think is like trying to control the wind. The more you try, the more exhausted you become. The same thing happens with success. People attach themselves to specific outcomes. They imagine the exact job they want, the exact recognition they hope to receive, the exact timeline for their achievements. They work toward these goals with determination, which is admirable, but beneath that determination often sits a rigid expectation. The mind quietly says that this result must happen, and when circumstances change, when luck interferes, when opportunities disappear, the mind struggles to accept the new reality. It begins replaying the situation again and again, asking why things did not go as planned. The future becomes another source of attachment. People try to predict it, control it, secure it. They imagine what life will look like years from now and begin worrying about whether those imagined outcomes will come true. The future, however, has never been something a human being could control. History is full of examples of lives that changed direction overnight. Empires collapsed, economies shifted, entire careers disappeared because of events no one could predict. Yet the human mind still tries to hold the future tightly, as if worrying about it long enough might somehow shape it. Even the past becomes something people cling to. The mind replays mistakes that cannot be undone. Conversations are repeated again and again in memory. People wish they had spoken differently, acted differently, chosen differently. But the past remains completely beyond reach. No amount of regret can travel backward in time and alter what has already happened. Yet the mind continues revisiting it, holding onto it as if refusing to accept that it is gone. All of this creates a constant emotional instability. When your peace depends on things that are constantly changing, your peace becomes fragile. Plans fail, relationships evolve, opportunities appear and disappear. Success arrives and leaves. Life moves forward in ways that cannot always be predicted. If your happiness depends on these external conditions remaining stable, then your emotional state will constantly rise and fall with them. This is why the Stoics paid such close attention to the problem of attachment. They saw how easily the mind becomes tied to outcomes. They saw how people suffer when life refuses to follow the script they had written for it. And they realized that the solution was not to control life more tightly. The solution was to loosen the grip. One of the most important insights from Stoic philosophy comes from Epictetus, who spent part of his life as a slave before becoming one of the most respected teachers of Stoicism. Despite his situation, he discovered that the mind still had a remarkable kind of freedom. He expressed this insight in a simple sentence that became one of the central teachings of Stoicism. Do not seek for things to happen as you wish, but wish for things to happen as they do happen, and you will go on well. This idea can feel uncomfortable at first. Many people interpret it as passivity or resignation, but that is not what the Stoics meant. They were not suggesting that people stop working toward goals or stop improving their lives. What they meant is something more subtle and more powerful. They believed that peace comes when a person stops demanding that reality conform to their expectations. Life unfolds according to countless factors that no single individual can control. Weather changes, markets shift, people make their own choices, circumstances evolve. Trying to force reality into a fixed shape often leads to frustration. Accepting that reality moves according to its own nature creates a different relationship with life. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor who practiced Stoicism while ruling one of the largest empires in history, wrote about this attitude repeatedly in his private journal. His life was filled with political pressure, wars, betrayals, and uncertainty. Yet he constantly reminded himself to maintain a calm acceptance of how events unfolded. In one passage from his meditations he wrote, "Receive without pride, let go without attachment." These few words contain a remarkable philosophy. Receive what comes into your life without arrogance. Let go of what leaves without clinging to it. Life becomes easier when the mind stops trying to freeze each moment in place. Every event arrives, stays for a while, and eventually passes. This pattern repeats throughout every stage of life. When a person understands this deeply, something begins to change in how they experience the world. Instead of constantly trying to hold on to every opportunity, every success, every relationship exactly as it is, they begin to see life as something that flows. People enter your life and sometimes leave it. Opportunities appear and sometimes disappear. Success grows and sometimes fades. Each moment moves forward into the next. Attachment interrupts this natural flow. The mind says that things must remain exactly as they are. It says that certain outcomes must happen. It says that certain losses should never occur. Reality rarely listens to these demands. When the mind insists on controlling what cannot be controlled, frustration becomes almost inevitable. This is why the Stoics focused so much attention on the limits of control. They believed that most people waste enormous amounts of emotional energy fighting against forces that will never obey them. They try to control the thoughts of others, the reactions of others, the future of their careers, the direction of entire events. These battles consume time, attention, and peace of mind. Stoicism begins with a different question. Instead of asking how to control everything, it asks a simpler question. What is actually within your power? Once the Stoics identified the problem of attachment, they began searching for a practical way to deal with it. They understood that people become disturbed when they try to control things that are not truly theirs to control. The solution required a clear distinction between what belongs to us and what does not. This distinction became one of the most important ideas in Stoic philosophy. It is often called the dichotomy of control. The idea itself is simple enough for anyone to understand, yet powerful enough to change the way a person experiences life. According to the Stoics, everything that happens in the world can be placed into one of two categories. There are things that are within our control, and there are things that are outside our control. This may sound obvious at first, but most people live as if this distinction does not exist. Their attention and emotional energy are scattered across events, people, and outcomes that they can never truly command. The Stoics approach life with a different attitude. They believe that peace of mind begins when a person becomes very clear about what actually belongs to them. Your thoughts belong to you. Your judgments belong to you. Your decisions belong to you. Your actions belong to you. Your character belongs to you. These things are deeply personal. They cannot be taken away by chance, by other people, or by circumstances unless you allow them to be influenced. The inner life of a person remains the one area where genuine control is possible. Everything else exists outside that inner domain. Other people have their own thoughts and their own desires. They will behave according to their own beliefs and emotions. No amount of effort can force another person to think the way you want them to think. Outcomes are also outside your control. You may work hard toward a goal, but success depends on many factors that lie beyond your influence. Reputation is another fragile thing. It depends entirely on the opinions of others, and opinions change constantly. Luck, timing, and circumstances all play their own role in shaping the events of life. Even time itself moves in ways no person can slow down or speed up. The Stoics believe that confusion between these two categories causes much of human frustration. People treat external things as if they belong to them. They try to possess success as if it were guaranteed. They try to possess the respect of others as if it were something they could demand. They try to possess the future as if careful planning could eliminate uncertainty. When these external things change, the person feels as though something personal has been taken away. Epictetus warned about this confusion very clearly in the Enchiridion. He wrote, "If you think that what is by nature slavish is free, and what is not your own is your own, you will be thwarted, miserable, and disturbed." This sentence captures the heart of the Stoic teaching. When you treat external events as if they belong to you, disappointment becomes unavoidable. The mind builds expectations around things that were never guaranteed in the first place. The moment those expectations collapse, the person feels defeated by life itself. Think about how often people attach their happiness to approval. Many spend years trying to be admired by others. They adjust their behavior to gain recognition. They measure their worth through compliments, praise, or public success. Approval can feel rewarding, but it also places emotional stability in the hands of strangers. One moment of criticism can shake the confidence that took years to build. The Stoics believed that this dependence creates a dangerous vulnerability. The opinions of others will always remain outside our control. Success produces a similar pattern. Many people believe they will finally feel satisfied once a certain achievement arrives. They imagine the moment when everything will fall into place. The promotion will come, the recognition will appear, the financial goal will be reached. For a while, this vision can motivate hard work, yet when happiness depends entirely on a future result, the present moment becomes filled with tension. Each obstacle feels like a threat to that imagined happiness. Each setback begins to feel like a personal failure. The Stoics did not reject ambition or effort. They encouraged people to pursue meaningful goals and to contribute to society. Success always depends on factors beyond personal control. A project may fail because of economic changes. A talented person may remain unnoticed while someone else becomes famous. Hard work can increase the chances of success, but it can never guarantee it. When happiness depends on success alone, the mind remains in a constant state of uncertainty. Marcus Aurelius reflected on this reality many times during his reign as emperor. He carried enormous responsibilities and faced countless unpredictable events. Wars erupted along the borders of the empire. Political conflicts developed within the government. Diseases spread through the population. Despite all his power, many of these events remained beyond his control. In his personal writings, he reminded himself where real strength could be found. In the Meditations he wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." This idea shifts the focus of life inward. Strength no longer depends on shaping the world according to personal desires. Strength grows from the ability to govern one's own mind. A person who understands this begins to invest their energy differently. They stop trying to manage every external situation. Instead, they work on their response to whatever situation appears. Another problem the Stoics noticed is the role imagination plays in human suffering. The mind has a powerful ability to project itself into the future. It can imagine every possible problem that might occur. These imagined scenarios often feel real enough to produce anxiety long before any event has taken place. A person may worry about losing their job, about failing in front of others, about becoming embarrassed, about missing opportunities. Hours and days can be spent thinking about situations that never actually happen. Seneca addressed this tendency with a simple observation that still rings true today. He wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." Many of the fears that disturb people exist only inside the mind. They are created by assumptions about what might happen. The Stoics believe that learning to recognize this habit is an important step toward freedom. When the mind stops projecting endless possibilities of failure, it becomes easier to focus on the present moment and the actions available right now. This shift in focus creates a remarkable form of stability. External conditions may still change, but the person no longer depends on those conditions for peace of mind. Their attention rests on something more reliable. Their choices remain within their control. Their actions remain within their control. Their character remains within their control. As long as these things remain steady, external events lose much of their power to disturb the mind. This is why Stoicism often feels empowering to those who practice it. The philosophy removes many unnecessary burdens from a person's shoulders. It frees them from the exhausting task of trying to manage everything that happens in the world. Instead, it gives them a clear area of responsibility, their own conduct. When attention moves into this area, energy becomes focused and productive rather than scattered across countless uncontrollable events. At this point, many people misunderstand the Stoic approach. They assume that letting go of external outcomes means becoming passive or indifferent to life. The Stoics never encouraged such an attitude. They believed in discipline, effort, and responsibility. They believed people should work hard, pursue meaningful goals, and contribute to their communities. What they refused to do was allow external results to dictate their emotional state. A Stoic could pursue success with determination while still remaining calm if success did not arrive. They could value relationships while accepting that people may change or leave. They could participate fully in life while recognizing that life itself unfolds beyond personal command. This balance allowed them to act with strength without becoming emotionally dependent on circumstances. When this perspective begins to take root, the idea of letting go becomes easier to understand. Letting go does not mean abandoning effort. It means releasing the belief that the final outcome belongs to you. Effort belongs to you. Character belongs to you. Integrity belongs to you. These things remain under your command, regardless of what happens around you. Once a person understands this distinction clearly, their attention naturally begins to move toward what is truly theirs. Their decisions become more deliberate. Their actions become more disciplined. Their character becomes the central focus of their life. External events continue to unfold as they always have, but they no longer carry the same emotional weight. This realization prepares the ground for something the Stoics considered essential. Understanding the difference between what we control and what we do not is only the first step. The next step involves training the mind to live according to this understanding every single day. Understanding Stoic philosophy can feel powerful when you first hear it. The idea that your peace should depend only on your own thoughts and actions makes sense on an intellectual level. But knowing this idea and actually living according to it are two very different things. The Stoics understood this very clearly. They never treated philosophy as something that should remain inside books or lectures. For them, philosophy was training. It was something practiced every single day. If a person wanted to develop the ability to let go, they had to exercise the mind regularly. The Stoics developed several methods for strengthening this ability. These practices were designed to slowly loosen the mind's attachment to external things. They did not try to force detachment all at once. They trained it gradually, through habits that changed how a person thought about comfort, loss, fear, and change. Over time, these practices built a kind of inner stability that could remain steady even when life became unpredictable. One of the most powerful practices they used is known as negative visualization. In Latin, it is called premeditatio malorum, which means the premeditation of difficulties. The idea behind this exercise is simple but often misunderstood. Instead of constantly imagining a perfect future, the Stoics sometimes imagined losing the things they valued. They imagined their comfort disappearing. They imagined losing possessions they owned. They imagined their status changing. Sometimes they even reflected on the possibility of losing people they loved. At first, this practice may sound pessimistic, but its purpose was not to create sadness. Its purpose was to strengthen appreciation for the present while weakening the fear of loss. The human mind easily becomes comfortable with what it has. Comfort slowly turns into expectation, and expectation turns into attachment. A person begins to believe that the current situation will continue forever. Negative visualization interrupts this illusion. When you imagine life without certain comforts, those comforts begin to feel like temporary gifts rather than permanent guarantees. When a person spends a few moments imagining possible difficulties, those difficulties lose much of their shock if they ever arrive. The mind becomes familiar with the possibility of change. Instead of reacting with panic, the person feels prepared. This practice also creates gratitude. When you imagine losing something and then realize it is still present in your life, appreciation naturally grows. Many people rush through their days without noticing how fortunate they already are. Negative visualization brings that awareness back into focus. Another Stoic practice aimed at reducing attachment was voluntary discomfort. The Stoics believed that comfort can quietly weaken a person's resilience. When life becomes too easy, the mind starts to fear hardship. Even small inconveniences begin to feel unbearable. To prevent this kind of dependency, Stoics occasionally exposed themselves to controlled discomfort. They would eat simple meals even when they could afford luxurious ones. They would sleep on a hard surface instead of a comfortable bed. They would walk long distances instead of taking an easier path. In modern terms, this practice can take many forms. Cold showers, difficult workouts, fasting, or temporarily limiting certain comforts can serve the same purpose. The point of these exercises was not to punish oneself. The Stoics were not interested in unnecessary suffering. They wanted to remind themselves that they could endure discomfort without losing their dignity or stability. When a person regularly experiences small challenges by choice, the fear of hardship begins to fade. Life inevitably brings moments of difficulty. A person who has never faced discomfort before often panics when those moments arrive. Someone who has practiced enduring hardship remains calmer. Seneca described this training in one of his letters. He advised people to deliberately spend time living in modest conditions, so they could see that they were capable of surviving them. He wrote, "Set aside a certain number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, and ask yourself, is this what I feared?" This question reveals something important about the nature of fear. Many fears grow larger inside the imagination than they are in reality. When you finally face the situation you once feared, you often discover that it is manageable. Voluntary discomfort exposes this truth in a controlled way. It shows the mind that comfort is pleasant, but not necessary for stability. Another Stoic method for letting go involves shifting perspective. The human mind often reacts strongly to events that feel overwhelming in the moment. A small criticism can ruin an entire day. A temporary failure can feel like the end of a career. The mind zooms in so closely on the immediate problem that it forgets the larger picture of life. Stoics trained themselves to zoom out. When something disturbed them, they would step back and ask questions that expanded their perspective. They would ask whether the problem would still matter years from now. They would imagine looking back on the situation from the end of their life. Many of the frustrations that seem enormous in the present moment shrink dramatically when viewed from this wider angle. Marcus Aurelius practiced this perspective constantly. As emperor, he faced political conflicts, military crises, and the pressures of ruling a vast empire, yet he reminded himself repeatedly that life is short and that every moment should be used wisely. In one of his reflections, he wrote, "Think of yourself as dead. You have lived your life. Now take what's left and live it properly." This statement carries a powerful reminder. When you imagine that your life has already passed and you are given one more chance to live it properly, many trivial worries lose their importance. The mind stops clinging to small irritations. Energy begins to focus on what truly matters. This shift in perspective makes it easier to release anger, disappointment, and frustration. A fourth Stoic practice that strengthens the ability to let go involves accepting impermanence. Everything in life moves through a cycle of change. People grow older, circumstances evolve, success rises and falls. Relationships develop and sometimes fade. Many people intellectually understand that change is part of life, yet emotionally they continue to resist it. They behave as if certain situations should remain frozen forever. The Stoics believe that remembering the temporary nature of things helps dissolve this resistance. When you clearly see that every moment is passing, attachment begins to loosen. Instead of clinging to what exists right now, you begin to appreciate it while it lasts. When change eventually arrives, the mind feels less shocked because it already recognized that change was inevitable. Marcus Aurelius used the image of a flowing river to describe this constant movement of life. In the Meditations he wrote, "Time is like a river made up of the events which happen. As soon as a thing has been seen, it is carried away." This image captures the rhythm of existence. Each event appears briefly before moving forward into the past. Trying to hold on to any moment permanently is like trying to stop a river with your hands. The current continues moving no matter how tightly you try to grasp it. When someone reflects on impermanence regularly, their relationship with life becomes calmer. They learn to appreciate experiences without believing they must last forever. They value relationships without believing they can control how long those relationships will remain the same. They pursue success without believing it defines their entire identity. Over time, these practices begin to shape the mind in subtle but powerful ways. Negative visualization reduces fear of loss. Voluntary discomfort builds resilience. Perspective shifts shrink problems that once felt overwhelming. Acceptance of impermanence removes the illusion that life can be frozen in place. Through repetition, these exercises train the mind to loosen its grip on external outcomes. Detachment becomes less of an abstract idea and more of a natural habit. A person who practices these methods regularly becomes less reactive when circumstances change. Losses still occur, disappointments still appear, but the emotional shock becomes smaller. This is why the Stoics treated these exercises as daily disciplines rather than occasional reflections. Just as physical strength develops through repeated training, mental stability develops through repeated practice. The ability to let go is not something that happens once. It grows gradually as the mind becomes familiar with change, difficulty, and uncertainty. By practicing these methods consistently, a person begins to develop a new relationship with life itself. The constant fear of losing things begins to fade. The need to control every outcome begins to soften. The mind becomes more flexible, more resilient, and more prepared for whatever events may unfold. And when this training continues long enough, it leads to something remarkable. It leads to a kind of inner freedom that many people spend their entire lives searching for. When the Stoic approach begins to take root in a person's life, something subtle but powerful starts to change inside them. At first, the change may not even be noticeable. The world around them continues to behave the same way it always has. Unexpected problems still appear, people still behave in unpredictable ways. Success and failure continue to rise and fall. Yet the way these events affect the mind slowly begins to shift. The person becomes less shaken by the ups and downs of life. Situations that once caused intense stress begin to feel manageable. Reactions that once came instantly begin to slow down. One of the first changes that appears is a decrease in fear. Fear thrives when the mind becomes attached to specific outcomes. A person fears losing their job because they believe their security depends entirely on that position. A person fears embarrassment because they believe their worth depends on the approval of others. A person fears failure because they believe failure would destroy their sense of identity. When attachment loosens, these fears lose much of their force. The job still matters, but it no longer defines the person's entire stability. Approval still feels pleasant, but it no longer determines their self-respect. Success still feels rewarding, but it no longer feels like the only acceptable outcome. Anxiety begins to fade as well. Anxiety often grows from the feeling that the future must unfold according to a particular plan. The mind constantly tries to predict what will happen next. It tries to calculate every possible risk and every possible outcome. When life begins to move in a different direction than expected, tension increases. Stoic practice gradually releases this pressure. A person still prepares for the future and works toward their goals, but they also accept that the final result will depend on factors beyond their control. This acceptance creates a calmer relationship with uncertainty. The future becomes something to meet with readiness instead of something to control with worry. Criticism also loses much of its power. For many people, criticism feels like a threat to their identity. They feel personally attacked when someone questions their decisions or judges their behavior. A Stoic perspective weakens this reaction. The mind becomes more interested in examining whether the criticism contains truth. If the criticism is useful, it becomes an opportunity to improve. If the criticism is unfair, it loses its ability to disturb. The opinions of others no longer carry the same emotional weight because they are recognized as external events that cannot fully define a person's character. Loss becomes easier to bear as well. Every human life contains moments of loss. Possessions disappear, opportunities vanish, and relationships sometimes end. When a person believes that these external things are the foundation of their happiness, loss can feel devastating. Stoic training prepares the mind for change long before it arrives. By understanding that all things are temporary, the person develops the ability to experience loss without feeling completely shattered by it. Sadness may still appear, but despair no longer dominates the mind. Over time, these changes produce a form of emotional stability that many people rarely experience. Life continues to present challenges, but the mind becomes steadier in the face of those challenges. Reactions grow calmer, decisions become clearer. A person who once felt overwhelmed by events begins to navigate them with greater confidence. It is important to understand that this transformation does not lead to indifference toward life. Stoicism never encouraged people to become passive observers of the world. The Stoics believed deeply in effort, responsibility, and participation in society. Marcus Aurelius governed an empire while practicing Stoic discipline. Seneca advised political leaders and wrote extensively on ethics and leadership. Epictetus taught students how to live honorable lives. These men were deeply engaged with the world around them. What changed was their relationship with outcomes. They pursued excellence in everything they did. They worked hard, fulfilled their responsibilities, and tried to contribute to the well-being of others. Yet they refused to tie their inner peace to the final result of their efforts. They understood that effort belongs to them, while outcomes are influenced by many factors beyond their control. Epictetus described this mindset in a simple but powerful statement. Make the best use of what is in your power, and take the rest as it happens. This sentence captures the balance the Stoics tried to maintain. They believed a person should give their full effort to the tasks before them. They should act with integrity, discipline, and purpose. At the same time, they should remain calm about the outcome that follows. Whether success arrives or not, the person has already done what was within their power. Marcus Aurelius expressed a similar attitude toward the unfolding of life. In the Meditations he wrote, "Accept the things to which fate binds you, and love the people with whom fate brings you together, but do so with all your heart." This idea encourages a form of acceptance that goes deeper than simple tolerance. It invites a person to recognize that life's circumstances are part of a larger flow of events. Instead of resisting everything that happens, the Stoic learns to work with the situation in front of them. They engage with the people who are part of their life at that moment. They do their best within the conditions they have been given. This attitude creates a surprising form of strength. Many people believe that control produces confidence. The Stoics discovered that confidence can grow from acceptance as well. When a person stops fighting every unexpected event, they conserve enormous mental energy. Instead of exhausting themselves through constant resistance, they direct their attention toward constructive action. Epictetus captured this wisdom in another short teaching. Do not demand that things happen as you wish, but wish that they happen as they do happen. These words echo the lesson introduced earlier in Stoic philosophy. Life does not unfold according to our personal expectations. Trying to demand that it does creates endless frustration. Learning to align our expectations with the reality of events creates peace. When someone practices this philosophy long enough, their entire outlook on life begins to change. Success becomes something to appreciate rather than something to cling to. Failure becomes something to learn from rather than something to fear. Praise becomes pleasant but unnecessary. Criticism becomes information rather than an attack. The person gradually becomes harder to disturb. This does not mean they become emotionless. Stoicism never required people to suppress their humanity. Joy, sadness, excitement, and disappointment are natural parts of life. The difference lies in how deeply these emotions control the mind. The Stoic learns to experience emotions without becoming completely dominated by them. Because their peace no longer depends on external circumstances, they gain a remarkable kind of independence. Success may come or go, but their sense of worth remains steady. Approval may appear or disappear, but their character remains the foundation of their identity. Circumstances may change in unpredictable ways, but their response to those circumstances stays guided by reason and integrity. This inner stability creates a form of freedom that is difficult to achieve through external achievements alone. Many people spend years chasing success, recognition, and security in the hope that these things will finally bring peace of mind. Stoic philosophy offers a different path. It suggests that peace becomes possible when a person stops attaching their happiness to those external conditions. A person who has learned the Stoic art of letting go moves through life with a quiet confidence. They continue to act, work, and pursue meaningful goals. They continue to care about the people in their lives. Yet beneath all of this activity lies a steady awareness that the only thing truly under their command is their own character. This awareness becomes the foundation of their freedom. Their peace does not depend on success. Their peace does not depend on approval. Their peace does not depend on circumstances. It depends on something much deeper and more reliable. It depends on their ability to meet whatever life brings with clarity, discipline, and self-command. And that is the ultimate freedom Stoicism offers.